I want to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that saves you time and money on cross-border transactions. As a CEO, there are days when my calendar feels like a never-ending cascade of decisions, meetings, and problems to solve. Days when I can't remember if I've eaten lunch. The last thing I have time to think about is currency exposure. This is where Alt21 can help by taking the complexity out of foreign exchange. With their FX and hedging platform, you can lock in exchange rates and automate payments. And with their low fees, up to 90% less than competitors, you'll save money while freeing up your time for what really matters. If you want to stop juggling and start focusing on growing your business, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newroll. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newroll, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Dr. Ali Parsa, is a founder who has seen it all. In 2014, he founded Babylon Health, a digital healthcare company that grew to a NYSE-listed $4.1 billion equity valuation in 2021, before it entered Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation in 2023. Previously, he was the co-founder of Circle Health in 2004, Europe's largest partnership of clinicians, and the first private company to manage an NHS hospital, which he grew to 200 million revenues, approximately 3,000 employees, and took public in 2012 before stepping down. A former investment banker at Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse, Ali started his entrepreneurial career by founding Victoria & Gillen, a media company that earned him the Royal Award for Young Entrepreneur of the Year. He is now leading Quadrivia, a new AI-focused healthcare venture. Ali, a huge welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Oliver, you and I had not seen each other for a long time and it's so nice to see you have not changed at all.
Well, I'm so pleased to see you again. And what I remember from when we first met, which was at the days when you were first starting Babylon, was your amazing backstory, escaping from Iran in the 1980s, I think it was, which I imagine plays an important role in how you navigate the highs and lows that are part and parcel of being an entrepreneur. Is that right? And if so, for those not familiar with that story, can you just briefly share it?
It's a simple story of many refugees where conditions becomes impossible for you to stay in your own country and you leave. And today in our countries, we are looking at the refugees who are coming to us and we think that these people are making these choices out of simple reasons. People leaving your country and walking to the other part of the world is often the toughest choice you have to make. And it's the hardest journey you have to take. And it was the same for me. It was a choice that I wish I never did have to make. I left a wonderful, well-to-do middle-class family on my own and had to find my way to the UK without speaking any language or knowing anything about the UK culture. And it was a period of incredible difficulty adjusting to it. The poverty, the dislocation, the lack of social knowledge of the society you joined. And at the time, I thought it was the worst thing that happened to me. But in reality, it was also one of the best things that happened to me, because I think that it's these difficulties that harden you, that give you resilience, is going through the tough that will make you appreciate the soft, but also toughens you up for what you need to do. And it also exercises muscles in your brain that you didn't know you have. I always tell my children that one of the best things they can do for themselves is to find their own difficulty that allows them to grow, right? A brain resilience is no different in my view than a muscle. You have to give it a little bit of a stress and the resistance to make it grow. So I absolutely am grateful for it today. But in life, you don't choose. You just deal with what is given to you, I think.
I always remember one of my favorite books is Grit by Angela Duckworth. And she references in that the work of Marty Seligman, the professor behind the sort of whole applied positive psychology movement, where he talks about learned optimism and gives the example of the experiments he does on these puppies, which would never be allowed today. But the key message that I took away from that is you basically need to create a moment where you really believe you're going going to die or something really awful is going to happen to you, and to get through it. And if you do get through it, then you always believe whatever situation you face, you will get through that. And to me, when I heard your story, I thought, wow, that is, that sliding doors moment you had when I think you were on the border and you had a kind soul who helped you out of a sticky situation. That must have been something that has informed how you face those difficult tasks and always gives you the belief that you will somehow get through them. Let's zoom in on your Babylon journey, because it really is an extraordinary story. And maybe we can start with your success fundraising, which again, is something that really stuck in my mind from when I first met you. It's clearly a superpower. You, at the time when I met you, had nothing, and you managed to raise multi-millions for a sort of a minority position. You then went on to raise 60 million, I think it was, at Series B in 2017, 550 million at Series C in 2019, before the SPAC in 2021 for the 4.1 billion. What is your secret?
I actually don't think there is a secret. And often people tell me this. I even read an article recently that came out talking about he knows how to raise money. But that assumes the investors are some kind of fool that you could just deceive by telling them a nice story, right? Which you and I both know there is no such investor out there, right? They're incredibly sophisticated. I think that the reason we managed to raise money, and by the way, at the end in Babylon, we didn't, right? When the market collapsed, we couldn't raise the money we needed. So it wasn't that we always were successful. But the reason investors invest in you or in anybody is because they want to see that you're tackling a problem that is large enough that if you succeed in solving it, you will get significant returns for them. One. Two, that you have a genuine passion for solving that problem and you're not a fake. Three, that you have thought this through in great detail. So it's not a dream, but it's a well thought through idea that you worked through its whys and the whats and the how. You've also worked through how you're going to do it. And then they need to know that you're going to give it all, that you're not going to be lazy about it, that this is something you're going to put everything on the line for it. And if you have a track record of having done it before, then that helps too. So I just don't think that I'm particularly a good salesperson. I never built a company in which I first didn't put a substantial amount of my own money relative to whatever it is that I have into it before I ask an investor for money.
I imagine there'll be a number of board members, founders, CEOs listening to this who will be facing the need to raise funding. And I think you're being modest. I think you do have something exceptional in the way that you go about that. And I'm sure if you were running New Roll today, we would have raised $500 million at this point. Like, what do you, if you were sitting on the board of one of those people listening and they were sitting there scratching their heads thinking, how do we go raise the money that we need to do this? What would be your framework for attacking that problem? What are the key questions or issues you think that need to be resolved?
Well, I think you have to answer in great detail, not superficially, your why, what, how, who, when, where, and how much question, right? You need to have a great reason for your business, but also for why you're going to raise money to have that business. You need to know what is it that you're going to do to solve that problem. You need to know how are you exactly going to solve it. So if somebody's giving you money, what is that money going to be used for to get you to the solution that you are saying you're going to solve, right? And your why needs to be solving a problem for people that is so obvious or so clear that when you solve it, you would get it. Look, you mentioned that we raised hundreds of millions of dollars in Babylon is true, but we also were one of the fastest companies ever to go from zero to $1 billion of revenue, right? We were growing at 400% a year, every year, right? I'm looking at investments where they're growing at 40% a year, and they are like super fast growth companies, right? So, and then they need to know that you have a team or yourself, that this team is capable. And they need to know that you've done the maths. You figured out how much is it going to cost, how much is it not. Now, you and I both know, we've been around the block long enough, that to know that best plans don't come true. I've never seen a spreadsheet that just materialized over a long period of time. And the reason for that is not that you are wrong. The reason of that is that it's impossible to predict the future, right? It's so many variables can affect your future. But it's important that you've done the hard work of thinking it through, and then people need to see that you're giving it everything, right? And then you have to accept that sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And for every investor that said yes to us, there were investors that said no to us. You know, the investors who came in at the very earliest stages of Babylon, I think they came in at $7-10 million valuation. I think that they held and then they exited at $4 billion, $4.5 billion valuation, something like this, I hope. I don't know who exited when, but people like that make, hopefully, if they held on and if they didn't get diluted, I don't know exactly what the situation was, around 500 times their money. There were people who sadly came much later, and unfortunately, we just couldn't make money for them. And it always stays with me, the fact that we lost money for some people, and it delights me that we made money for others.
Tell me about your approach to growing revenues, because as you said, it wasn't just about the fundraising. You had, by 2022, you had over $1 billion of revenues, and you had achieved that through multiple channels. You'd made inroads with the insurers, you had contracts with Bupa and Prudential, you had inroads into different national entities in Rwanda and Saudi Arabia, you had some big technology partners, I think with Tencent and Samsung, as well as the government, the NHS the contracts, as well as in the US with, I think, Medicaid. Just talk me through, for again, board members listening to this, some of them will be wrestling with those sorts of questions, like how do we go to market quickly, scale our revenues? What enabled you to do that so quickly?
So the part that people often don't see is that the flat part of an S-curve is flat, right? At the very beginning, it takes a long time to build the revenue base, but it comes from what you and I were just talking about. It comes from finding a big problem that needs solving. They're going to truly figure it out, solve it in a very fundamental way. So with us, we said, look, healthcare is inaccessible, quality healthcare is inaccessible and unaffordable. Now, what does that mean is inaccessible, right? With us was, if I want to go see a doctor, I cannot see one for 2-3 weeks if I'm lucky in a good country. And if I'm in a country that doesn't have any healthcare, I could maybe never be able to see a doctor. 50% of the world population have near zero access. And we thought that everybody has a mobile phone. As long as we can put most of the healthcare most people need on the mobile phones they already have, that's highly accessible. Then we said, okay, but how does that make it quality healthcare, right? Just because somebody can talk to a doctor on the other side of the mobile phone, that doesn't necessarily make it a quality event. And we said, okay, if we uniform through a platform the kind of care that can be given, take the best care and distribute it among all of our doctors at the same time, all that kind of standards we put in, that will solve a big chunk of the problem. And then we said, how do you make it affordable? And we looked at it and we thought, costs in healthcare sit in 2 buckets. One is 70% of all the costs are doctors, nurses. And as long as we're going to expect them to do everything in healthcare, that cost is never going to go down, right? So we created software, automation services, AI, and that could do some of the work to reduce how much a doctor had to do or a nurse had to do. And on the other hand, about 60% of all costs in healthcare are predictable and preventable, right? So if I can monitor you continuously, or I can preempt issues by predicting it, I can save the disaster. So if I can intervene when there's a $10 problem, right, and when it's a $1,000 problem, I can solve that. So we spend a lot of time solving each of these issues, right? We were then going to clients and say, look, instead of your workforce or your members waiting 10 days to see a doctor, we can give one to them within minutes. Those doctors sit on a quality platform so that what the work they do is standardized so we can control it. And then we can find out who are your sickest members and we can monitor them even and intervene early. And we do things cheaper. I don't understand why people wouldn't want to buy that, right?
There'll be lots of board members and founders listening to this going, I have a product and all I need is that distribution. And if we take a specific example, right, for many organizations, getting into a distribution channel like Bupa or Prudential is going to be a game changer. What have you learned about getting into a contract like that a board member listening to this might learn from and be able to help their founder, CEO leverage?
I never worked with any of my clients as a company. I work with wonderful, innovative, go-getting entrepreneurs in each of those organizations who wanted to do what we were doing, and we were a tool for them to deliver what they needed to do. So in each of the organizations you named, I can name you, I wouldn't name them here, I don't want to embarrass them, but I can name you an amazing executive, an amazing partner to us, who actually wanted to do everything that we were doing, but they used us as a tool to deliver the services that they wanted to do in their organizations, as an addition to the great work their organization teams and members were.
How do you go about finding them? Because one of the challenges I sometimes see organizations wrestling is they find individuals who are keen, but ultimately they haven't got the means to make things happen in their organization and they get caught up in treacle. And so unless you're talking to the CEO, and even sometimes CEOs struggle with it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. How do you find great people in different organizations? And the truth of the matter is you don't. They find you. Because we have this belief that we are the agents of change, but we're not. We're often the tools of change in the hands of the agents of change where they can have the power to do so. I had this wonderful partner, and I call him partner, in one of the largest insurance companies in the United States who became one of our largest partners. He had a very clear vision of what he wanted to achieve for his organization, for the division of the organization that he was running. It just happens that his vision and mine were the same, and we sought each other in a very crowded market of people with different visions, right? You get attracted to each other because you have the same views, the same values, the same objectives, mission, and that brings you together. And then when all of that works, you would say, why don't we work together? I think people who want to work with you, they want to see two things. And it's a very Darwinian thing about us. And that's true about making friends as it is about making partners at work. One is that they can trust you. Nobody wants to go to battle with somebody who is going to stab them in the back. And two is they want to see that you're competent, that you can deliver. Again, nobody wants to go to battle with somebody who's going to become a burden, right? They want to know that they are an addition to them. And those characteristics is your job. You have to be very true, very honest, and do your best for your partner. And you have to be competent as your job. You need to know your job super well. If you do, I never seen people not wanting to use your services. And if they don't, I talk to people who say, I got the most amazing product in the world, but nobody wants to buy it. And I just think that sentence is an oxymoron, right? If it is the most amazing solution in the world and people have a real problem, people should find you rather than you going to find them. And if you're having a problem selling it, what's wrong with what you're doing?
Okay, really good challenge that I think many organizations perhaps don't ask themselves enough. Like, if this is not moving, what's wrong with us? What could we change about us rather than what can we change about the organization?
The old saying, if you want to change the world, start by looking at the mirror. That's always the case. I tell you this, Ollie, you look at most organizations out there, right? Most of them get away with delivering really lousy service with really lousy products and charging you as much as they can get away with, trying to maximize their profit, minimizing the value they give to the customers. We all know who they are, right? That the majority of organizations out there. And then when the customers eventually abandon them and go, then they start for the first time blaming everybody, including customers don't understand us, partners don't understand us. Your listeners are often board members. In all honesty, what is the percentage of a board time that is spent on the value proposition for the customers. What you sit in boards, right? How much time is spent on looking at your financials, your issues, your situations, your things, rather than your customers' problems, your customer service? What is it that you're going to give to them? I have never seen an organization that obsesses about its customers, that fails with its customers. Babylon obsessed about its customers. We never failed with our customers. I don't think we ever lost a customer. We failed because of a different reason. We just, financial markets in which we were operating failed, and we, as a result, with every single other SPAC company that went public through a SPAC failed. There is not a single company who didn't fail of our cohorts, and we couldn't be the exception either. But it wasn't because of our customers.
You ended up closing down the UK to focus on the US because that's where you were growing most quickly and had most of the revenues. In hindsight, should you have just gone straight to the US? Was that, it's been written that you was charging £100 a patient in the UK, which was always going to make the economics very difficult. Was that a mistake in hindsight? Was it a selection mistake? Was it a not figuring out the economics mistake? What have you learned from that choice?
So we didn't close UK. We closed 1% of our revenue in the UK by putting a contract back in mutual agreement with the NHS. And that was because the hospital we were working with had financial challenges, so they couldn't pay. So we just took it, accepted that we will not deliver services. We just didn't want to embarrass anybody. So we said that. And then everywhere was that Babylon withdraws from contracts. We never did. We never let a client down by withdrawing from any contract. So, and that was less than 1% of our UK revenue. I think that if we were a more brutal business, we would have shut down UK for pure economic reasons, right? You're absolutely right. It makes very little sense. And also in UK, healthcare is incredibly political in a way that it's not in United States or other countries, right? So it be also any negative article about Babylon, you almost like find its route to the UK. Like there was none in US. And that's because it's a private company working in UK with the NHS has a lot of people who don't like it. Now, it's not for us to judge whether that's right or wrong. It's just for us to serve where they need our services. And it happened that in the US, they needed it a lot more. But a bigger lesson for me, Ali, is that we used to say in Babylon, dream big, build fast, and be brilliant. And I think the dream big basically means you have to identify a very large total addressable market if you want to build a very large company. But you also, against that, you need to be super focused because you don't have all the resources in the world to do everything. At the beginning of your business, being focused is an incredibly hard thing to do, unlike the common wisdom that you have to start with a very tiny thing. And the reason for that is you don't know who's going to buy your product when you first start. Is it going to be somebody in UK? Is it going to be private? Is it going to be public? We didn't have any revenue, and we had a great entrepreneur from a great company in Asia calling us and saying that we're going to give you a significant amount of revenue. What do? Do we say no to that? You have zero to get $2, $3, $5 million of revenue, and somebody wants to give you $100 million of revenue. You would just go in and say, sorry, you're not in my realm of activity or in my geography. I won't do it. It's easy, right? For people who haven't solved or hadn't had to run businesses or pay salaries, it's easy for them to say, yes, of course you have to stay solid to the one path you have. But in practice, these decisions are hard. But then that was 100 million over 7-8 years, so it was 15 million a year, something like this. But then once we were making $1 billion a year in the United States, you could look at that 15 million and say that's a distraction. But it wasn't a distraction the day that it was the only lifeline you had to build your business. And now that it has become a distraction 7-8 years later, 6 years later, do you abandon that client who helped you the first day and say, sorry, you're not important to me anymore, right? That's just not the way a human being should behave. So I think that this ruthless focus on just making money has got to be balanced with with the humanity of looking after the people with whom you work, right? The reason people trusted us, and the reason I hope in my next business people trust, is because they know that you don't only make selfish decisions for yourself. You make your decisions to, above everybody else, to look after your clients.
So that question is, I think, one of the key strategic questions facing many boards of which market to focus in. And if I heard you properly there, then sounds like actually you should focus on if you've got a free choice at the beginning, you go focus on your biggest market and you focus on it. And that line of thinking would tend towards, well, we should all go and start businesses in the US. The flip side of that is what you alluded to, that sometimes in order to get your stepping stones there, you sometimes need to be opportunistic. And as an investor, I used to spend my whole time saying focus, focus. And now as an operator, I'm all over the place. So the challenge of that choice really resonates. But for a board member listening to this who might be facing that challenge and listening to the way you've articulated that, would you make the same choices with those market decisions now with the benefit of hindsight?
By the way, I don't believe that you should only look at the biggest market in the world and go there, right? Because also the biggest market is often the most competitive market, is the most expensive market to get to. Like at some stage, my investors all wanted us to go to the United States because we were doing so well, but they didn't have the money for the United States, right? So when we went to the US and the market went wrong, I remember one of my US competitors couldn't give us $300 million that they were supposed to give us, not because they're bad people, just because their investors, when the market collapsed, pulled their money out too, right? When things go wrong, it goes wrong for everybody. It doesn't just go wrong for one sector of the thing. So for completely valid reasons, they couldn't give us their money. And our European or other investors didn't have the quantum of the money that we needed or couldn't give it, or they had issues. But at the very same time, our US competitor, who had exactly the same amount of revenue, had far more losses than us, and their investors put another $3.5 billion into that business. And as a result, they survived, and then a bit later, they sold it for $8 billion. Now, in total, they put $5 billion, they sold it for $8 billion. In total, we put $1 billion. If we put another little bit, we could have survived it. So I think you need to look at your resources and see, do I have the money from day one to play in that very big market? Should I be playing somewhere else? Look at Revolut, right? Revolut has built a massive business without going to the United States. They're now going to the US now, but they address all the parts of the world that nobody else really went to. The US is 25% of the world market, but US is not 75% of the world market. Right. So you could go to other places. Now you could argue, once you had China, which is highly inaccessible in my view to most people, India, which is hard to get into. When you go, it's the accessible market. Russia is very little for most people. So that makes US very attractive because it is an open, accessible market by most measures. But those decisions are why board members, executives, get paid the big bucks.
Let's move on to talk about managing stakeholders. The thing that really interests me about your stakeholder management was you were obviously technology-based product, and it's something I wrestle with now, getting those cross-functional teams to interact with one another. What I'm interested in is, from your perspective, like getting cross-functional teams to work. What have you learned that if you're sitting on a board with a CEO founder now who is wrestling with that thing, because it's really hard getting your product and engineering to work with your go-to-market teams. Well, how has your thinking on that evolved, and what advice would you be offering as a board member now?
We used to have what we call 6 monthly vows that were divided into 3 months, and then they were reviewed every month. And the entire almost initially organization was invited to it. But as we grew really big, that every function was it. And by vow, we mean, what are we going to do? The first W. The O was who owns it. And the last O or W was when are you going to deliver, right? And the entire organization had access to that. So you could go on our intranet and you could see he's doing which job. And our aim was that you could say that aim of the organization in this quarter, for instance, is get to $500 million of revenue. In order to do that, it needs a platform that can scale to 10 million people. That platform needs a cloud server that could do this. And my job is to build this element of the cloud. Right. So now, could we do that fantastically for everybody? No, but that was our aim. Right? Where we had good managers, that was happening. Where we had maybe a little bit weaker, it wasn't. So I don't think I learned anything after leaving Babylon Unted. And by the way, I didn't create this. I had such amazing managers in my senior leadership team who put these things together, right? We had people from Google and their OKR system, from Amazon and their execution system. But what I learned from those people in Babylon is just communicate. Your job as a leadership, it's not to tell people what to do. It's to create an environment in which they can do their best and collect all of that and make sure everybody knows. Your job is almost to create an environment in which everybody can talk to each other. Having said all of that, Ali, I have never worked in a single organization where people said they are getting enough communication, that they know about enough things. And that's natural because in an organization, you hire highly intelligent people who want to know a lot, but there is only so much their brain kind of has capacity to do their job, to understand. Honestly, I didn't know many of things that were happening, and I shouldn't. I should just trust my guys that they were going to do their job.
Yeah, it reminds me, I think one of the board members once told me, if you haven't said something 10 times, you haven't said it. And that's really been a very helpful mental model for me. And it's amazing how you think everyone has heard it, but actually they're really, you've communicated it again and again until you're bored. There's been lots written on some of your battles with the investor directors. There was one line that made me laugh when I read it, where I think you said, "We're dealing with a generation of investors and entrepreneurs who've never seen tough times. They're not around for the dot-com bust. Their mummy and daddy put them through Eton and they ended up in Oxford. They have no coping mechanisms apart from panic." I take it you have a fairly dim view of investor directors.
No, that was not, by the way, if you actually read the totality of that interview, that was not had anything to do with my own investor directors. I think actually I was super lucky to have fantastic investor directors. Okay, we all end up with one or two that are not good. I mean, I had ones that really were out of their depth. They were running a tiny little investment fund and have only ever run 4 people, for instance, in their lives, and they would just fine. But vast majority of my investor directors were highly accomplished, highly knowledgeable people.
What did you get from them? Can you give me some examples? Because often I don't get value from their investor directors, so it's always great to hear examples.
Yeah, there is a series of behaviors. Like you get the board member who just shows up, sits there and says nothing. Waste of time, right? Maybe they need to be an observer because they're looking after their investments. Fine. But it's no added value to you, right? You get the board member who comes in and listens really carefully and helps you with the problems that you have or encourages you when you're doing well, right? But they align their interests and yours to make the team win, right? And then you have the board members who just want to show to other board members that they're of added value. They just want to talk without any things. I've seen all of those, and I've seen board members who are distracted, who forget that everybody should be in the same team. The executive is not there to be accountable to you, because if you have a destructive board, and I think before this interview, you were telling me most boards are destructive, right? I fortunately didn't have this experience. I did have one board that was destructive at one of my companies, and I saw it. And that was the board that investment banker put together, because we were just not thinking about it. We did, and he basically created a board in his own image. And oh my gosh, it was just, they were all elderly, but they were all almost like fighting with each other. Dreadful environment, right?
But can you give me a specific moment where a board member, an individual board member, has added value for you?
Yes, many. So I have board members who would sit there and would say, my job above everything else, like a great coach, is to make sure that when I leave this board, my executive are more energized than when they came into this board, right? Wonderful thing he would do. Every single time, he would just give energy to everybody without giving platitude, right? He would say, this is fantastic what you're doing. This I will do differently, but I tell you what, blah, blah, blah. Like imagine, think of a board as you're going into the halftime. You and I are both football supporters, fans, right? Can you imagine if our manager went into the halftime, into the changing room and started telling everybody off, making them feel miserable, making them feel belittled about themselves so that he himself can look great. And then he can have something minuted that says that's what he said. And then how dreadful that team will feel when they come out in the second half.
There's data that shows it's a completely flawed strategy and that actually people only hear the positives and that the negatives have a negative impact. People don't change because you put them into fight or flight, whereas focusing on the positives, that gets them repeating those behaviors.
One of my favorite books of all time, 100-year-old book, is How to Make Friends and Influence People. Chapter number 1 is never to criticize. Now, that doesn't mean never to provide a critique of somebody's work, not to do so to not help. Like a great manager will tell the team when they're playing badly, but will do so by energizing them to go there and do a better job, right?
Bankruptcy is not something any founder wants to experience, but I imagine it's been a rich source of learning for you. Any major insights that you think would be particularly helpful for board members listening?
Oh my gosh, I learned so much. But I tell you something I learned, which I'm not even sure I could say and not get myself into legal trouble here. I think the incentives in the bankruptcy proceedings are all wrong. I don't think my company should have gone down. I don't think that it's, and I've said that publicly before and I say it again, I don't think it was accidental that it went down 6 months after I lost control of the business. And I don't think the decisions they made was wrong for them or wrong for what they should have done. But I think that incentives very quickly separate, right? And different countries even force you to have different incentives, right? In the UK, for instance, or in Jersey, if you have debt holders, their things comes first. In Delaware, the survival of the company comes first. If we were a Delaware-based company, it would be alive in my view today. But because we were a UK or Jersey-based company, we had to basically almost give the hand ease on all the decisions to board members that were appointed by the debt holders who had to, by law, keep the interests of the debt holders first, right? So nobody make the wrong decision based on their note. Everybody's trying to do their best. The problem is their best serves the interest that they have at the time and what is right for them at the time, not necessarily always the company. And I just think that in United States, in Delaware, they have a much better way of dealing with these things, which will allow for the survival of the company and the alignment of interests, right, to be better than what we have in some other countries. Having said that, even there, it's a huge problem, right? I tell you, at the end, Babylon needed maybe $50, $60, $70 million to break even and be fine. Now, some can argue it was a little bit more, but in the grand context of things, it wasn't a huge amount. But our debt holders of Babylon, under the pressure because of the bankruptcy situation, spend almost as much, but not as much money, but half of that money or 60% of money on legal fees and on administrators' fees, right? Imagine if that money was put into the business, right? So I think our bankruptcy administration systems are totally broken. I think they don't serve the interest of the employees, of the customers, but I don't think the people who acted are disingenuous. I think that they have to act within a system that forces them to do what they do, but the results are not good for anybody.
Ali, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to say a short statement and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
Thank you.
Best book every board member should read, and why?
There is no such thing as a best book. No book has got all the knowledge, and you have to read many books. I'm an avid reader, but if I had to choose a single book that everybody should read, in my view, it should be How to Make Friends and Influence People. It's a 100-year-old book, and it's as valid today as the day it was written, and I'm shocked that it is not taught in every school.
Boardroom behavior that irritates you most?
Grand.
Most valuable board ritual?
Bring everybody to the board. Bring all your executives. Let them present their own work. Don't write too many pages. but make sure your board members have all the information you have. In Babylon, in administration, we were not sued even once, not by one company. Imagine $5 billion US company going bust and not a single lawsuit. And the reason for that is we were so transparent, so truthful all along. And all our board members and all our investors had access to everything. And that's super important. Transparency.
Favorite quote?
I guess it's from, as we were talking about football, it's from Ted Lasso. It is your choices that decide who you are rather than your abilities.
I love that series. I don't know why more people aren't made to watch it. It's so brilliant. Most significant professional insight?
I would say never compromise on quality. And that is quality of your dream, quality of your product, quality of the people you surround yourself with, and quality of your clients, right? Just focus on doing the best you possibly can, and everything else will be okay. And even when they're not okay, most people will stay your friends and you keep going.
Worst professional advice you've ever received?
You and I talked about it in this podcast. Put any bum on a seat, you'll fix it later. I don't think that's right. At Goldman Sachs, and not that we always did it, but we used to have a motto which I loved, and I try to abide by it most of my career. And that is, we do our deals in billions when we hire up people one at a time. And I think it's super important not to compromise.
What have you changed your mind about regarding boards over time?
I used to think when I was younger, that the board should be just your investors, you're accountable to them. I now believe your board should be people who are far smarter than you, that can help you and be your mentor. Create a board of mentors. You have to have your investors in the board because it's their duty to look after you. But they often are not going to add as much value as your mentors will. And if they challenge you, that's the best thing that can happen to you. I hate it when people just don't challenge me. And I just thrive so much when I learn.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom? And what did you learn?
That's a very painful one, but it's true. The day I was forced to lose control of Babylon. I made a wrong judgment call. And the call I made was not to resign. I should have resigned Babylon and I should have resigned the company then. I didn't because I'm not a quitter and I thought that I can save it and I can stand by it. But the reality was it gave me 6 months of hell towards inevitable and I could do nothing about it because I didn't control it.
Finally, what 3 takeaways should listeners get from this podcast if they remember nothing else?
Look, the motto we had in Babylon, the motto we have now in Quadrivia is the same. Dream big, build fast, and be brilliant. The world is full of massive problems. Find one and solve it. Life is super short, so whatever you do, it's super fast because any big problem takes a long time, so don't waste time. And then never cut corners. Whatever you do it brilliantly because you have to look at yourself in the mirror one day. And when things go wrong, as it did with Babylon, it's the quality of the way you did things where things were going right that comes and save you when things go wrong. And the last one is, and probably by far the most important one, you're not defined by how often you fall. That's often not your choice. You're defined by how often you get up and how fast you get up. Just keep going. Never let anything stop you. Your challenges in life is everybody else's has those challenges too. Sometimes you just don't see them. And be kind. And I tell you this, and I will finish with this. When Babylon went under, we had a tiny group of people who were unkind. They were often reflected in media, this, that, the other. But the reason they were reflected because they were the exception. They were tiny. Vast majority of people in my life, you told the story of when I was arrested at the border and some young man saved me, to all the way to Babylon, is that it's incredible kindness of humans who come along, help you, get you up your feet. And what you find is most people are generous when you are on your way up, but are incredibly generous when you're on your way down. So dream big, build fast, be brilliant, but above all else, help other people to reach their dreams.
As Churchill said, success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. Ali, I'm so pleased and inspired to see you unbowed and going again. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience. It's been a real privilege.
I'm super grateful, but let's just not, we had one failure. Huh? We went from success to one failure. And by the way, that failure, and I think it's super important. Let me finish with this. I know you don't need to put it in the podcast, but there is no such thing in my view as failures or success. At the time that you think you're at the height of your success, you could also have the genesis of your failure there. And at the time that you think is at the worst of your failures, there is something in there that will create your success, right? You and I are Arsenal fans. When Arsenal was doing super well, was at the time we didn't invest to do well and for future. And when Arsenal was doing super badly, was the time that shook us up to rebuild the team. So I'm not a big believer in anybody's ever a success or ever a failure. I think it's the balance between these two. And so I hate to disagree with Churchill, but I don't simplify it that way.
Building a non-exec career is hard. For those starting out, boards can be opaque. For more experienced board members, it can be lonely and hard to stay match fit. Having placed almost 4,000 people on boards in the last 5 years, we know what success looks like. It requires time, energy, resilience, information, and connections. New Role Plus, our community of board peers, exists to give you these things, offering you wholesale support as you try to get board roles and become a standout Ned. Find out more at newrole.com/newrole-plus. That's newrole.com/newrole-plus.